Say this red 3 has been known to cause cancer in cosmetics, but we still allow it to be put in our food. I don't understand that. Go ahead.
So Red 3, we have a petition in front of us to revoke the authorization for it, and we are hopeful that within the next few weeks we will be acting on that petition, and a decision should be forthcoming.
Tell us that process. How does that work? The timeline, if we know something's deadly for anybody that ingests it, how do we continue to just study that and not say, hey, enough's enough?
Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Vanessa. I am so happy that you are here. Today we're going to be talking about Red 3 and the fact that Red 3 was just banned by the FDA as a food dye in our food. And I want to start off by talking about the Delaney Clause and why it's so important to know about the Delaney Clause when we talk about the food dyes. So in 1960, the Delaney Clause was enacted by Congress, and it states that the FDA does not have the authority to authorize any food dye if it has been shown to cause cancer in humans or animals. So this is very, very important when looking at the history of Red 3, and also if we talk about other food dyes. But specifically, this video is going to be about Red 3, so I'll just stick to Red 3. But just know that our standard, which I think it's a great standard, is that if any food color, food dye causes cancer in humans or animals, we do not want it in our food. That is our standard. But as you're going to see, as we go through the timeline, that standard or this law was not upheld. And when you look at some of the comments, either from like the FDA, there's a video that I'm going to show you towards the end of this video. Some comments from like people in the FDA, they might say that, well, this ingredient doesn't cause cancer in humans. Well, I say, and also the law says, it doesn't matter. Our standard is that if any food dye causes, or any food additive, color additive causes cancer in humans or animals, we don't want it in our food. And I think that is a great standard. So let's go into the timeline. In 1907, Red 3 was first approved to be used in our food. In 1939, it was approved to be used in cosmetics and drugs. And this is important because when we fast forward to 1980, in 1980, the FDA had the first studies showing that Red 3 actually caused cancer in rats. It caused cancer in animals. So they knew this in 1980. So you would think, as well as I, thought, okay, well, the Delaney Clause was established in 1960. If the FDA knew that Red 3 caused cancer in animals in 1980, then they would move to ban Red 3 from being used in cosmetics and drugs and in our food, of course. But of course, this did not happen. So it wasn't until 1990, 10 years after, that the FDA moved to ban the use of Red 3 from cosmetics, so like lipstick and blush, to topical drugs. So anything that we put on our skin, the FDA said Red 3 was not allowed in because there was definitive evidence that showed that Red 3 caused cancer in animals. Specifically, it caused thyroid cancer in male rats. So this was in 1990. Okay, finally it got banned. But it was just in cosmetics and topical drugs. It was not banned in food. And it was not banned in food until 2025, actually January 2025. So this year, about 6 weeks ago, because today is February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day to all of you guys. But it was until 6 weeks ago that Red 3 was banned from being used as an ingredient in our food. So that's about 34 years after they banned it from being used in makeup and topical drugs, which is so, when you think about it, it doesn't make sense. Why was this ingredient not good enough per the FDA to be used as an ingredient in anything that we put on our skin, but it was okay for us to ingest it? Also, just, backtracking a little bit, they knew in 1980 that it caused cancer in rats, but they didn't ban it till 1990. That's a 10-year difference. And in those 10 years, you see that they were studying it. They were trying to gather more information. But in my opinion, how is it possible that you're studying an ingredient to see, whether, specifically they're looking at more studies in animals, but regardless, that ingredient is still being used in our products. It was still being used in, sorry about that noise. It was still being used in our food. And at that point, it was still being used in makeup, cosmetics, and topical drugs. So I think that that's something that's very wrong with our process, is that these ingredients, while they're being studied to see if they're okay to be used in our food or in our drugs, medication, as well as cosmetics, they're still being allowed as an ingredient in these different, things. That's kind of backwards. You would think we would want to know it's a safe ingredient and be very sure of that before it's being, allowed to be used. And if there's any question that it may not be a good ingredient, that we would, remove it from being used. So again, it wasn't until 2025 that Red 3 finally got banned. But it wasn't because the FDA, thought to do it on their own. It was actually because in 2022, a petition was filed by the Center of Science in the Public Interest in about a group of 23 other organizations or scientists. They sent a petition to the FDA, which I'll link and the details of this video if you guys want to check it out. It does give you a more thorough details about all the studies that were done. So if you really love this stuff like me and want to get into it, I highly recommend to read that petition. It's kind of fun looking at the history. But it wasn't just the FDA thinking, oh shoot, let me go back, we should probably look at this ingredient, reassess it, and see if it's a good ingredient to continue. It was because they were petitioned to look at it, which, I think about, like I mentioned, I am a dietitian. I've been practicing as a dietitian for the last 9 years, and I can hear my other fellow dietitians, not all of them, but I can hear them saying, hey, why are you, maybe spreading fear about these ingredients? If they are allowed to be used in our food, it's because they're good. It's because the FDA has checked, right? They've done the work and they've done the research, and it's approved, so it's good, right? But the reason why I think Red 3 is such a fascinating food dye to look at, and specifically to look at its history of when it was approved and when these studies in animals showing that it caused cancer, came out in 1980, and it was until 1990 that it got banned in cosmetics, but it wasn't until 2025 that it got banned in food. When you look at that history, it just brings to the forefront that we as consumers have to be involved and have to be knowledgeable of these ingredients, because how much can we really trust? And I don't want to instill fear, but I think that we have to be aware of the history. And if this is something that they missed with Red 3, or not even that they missed, but it took them such a long time to actually remove Red 3 from our food, how can we trust that they're not going to then tell us, what, there's about 7 food dyes that are commonly used in our food. How do we know they're not going to come out, in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years saying, oops, yeah, we have to remove these as well, which is fine. It's allowed, but that, new studies come out and all of that is allowed. But this feels a little bit more like you're not doing your job, because it doesn't make sense that you banned it in 1990 from being used in cosmetics and topical drugs, anything that we put in our skin, but you didn't ban it from food, our food, from things that we put inside of our body. If you look a little bit more into it, there's special interest that come to play. Allegedly, I don't know. I mean, you guys can look into that yourselves. I did read something about the cherry industry. So if you guys remember sundaes, right? The bright cherries. Well, Red 3 was actually an ingredient, the food dye that was used to color the cherries, and it would make them super bright, red. There's also Red 40, but Red 40 was not as good at coloring the red cherries because it would bleed out. And there was actually a report, I was reading this article written by the Chicago Tribune It was written back in 1990, but it stated that an industry study found that in the fruit cocktails, which had those red cherries that were dyed with red 3, without those pink cherries, those bright cherries, the sales of those fruit cups would go down by 40%. So the food industry would lose money. To me, or not the food industry, whoever sells like the fruit cups, and I guess also like whoever sells the cherries and all that. So there would be a loss of money. Okay. But what is the benefit to you? What is the benefit to me as a consumer, as somebody who would eat these products? What is the benefit? Sure, they're making money off of it. We have brighter cherries, and I guess that would be harmless if that's all that there was, right? But we know, as I've shared, there are studies that show that this red 3 causes cancer in animals. The Delaney Clause states anything that causes cancer in humans or animals shouldn't be allowed in our food. And again, I feel very comfortable with if something causes cancer, if an ingredient causes cancer in humans, of course, let's not use it. If it causes cancer in animals, yeah, also let's not use it. That sounds like a good line not to cross, a good standard. But in addition to that, some of you guys might have heard about food dyes causing like behavioral problems in children. So there was a report written for the California Office of Environment Health Hazard Assessment that stated that the 7 most widely used food dyes, of which red 3, is one of them, can cause or make worse behavioral problems in some children. And the FDA also came out and said that there's evidence that show that most kids are going to be okay with these food dyes, but that some children, there is evidence to suggest that certain children may be sensitive to them. So when you look at that like pros and cons, like the benefits are what? That our food is a little brighter. I mean, the cherries look totally fake with that red 3. But also the other thing to think about is red 3 is mostly going to be used in a food product that's highly processed. That it's not really made with like whole ingredients. Why do we need to recolorize? Because it's just like put together with a bunch of like junk that if you don't make it more appealing by adding like flavors and color additives, we're not going to want it. They're not, we're not going to want to buy it. Therefore, they're not going to make any money. So again, what is the benefit to us from using red 3? I really think there is no benefit. If it was just, it makes our food brighter, fine. But again, causes cancer in rats as well as may affect some children in terms of their behavior. So it all kind of seems like negative, right? Okay, now I want to jump into this video. So this is a video. It was a Senate Health Committee hearing that took place on December 5th of last year, 2024. And the senator is questioning the chair of the FDA, which is Dr. Robert Califf. So I want to play this for you. Okay, so I'm gonna start playing it from here.
Growing up, and it's really gotten out of control. So I want to ask you about red 3 and red 40, both of you, and get your comments on this. It's not a conservative or a liberal standpoint. I think we all need to understand as a group about how we've gotten to this point. The FDA has a position that food colorings like 40 are safe for a kid's ingestion. Do both of you stand behind that, Dr. Caleb?
I'm going to refer that to Mr. Jones.
Okay.
We have not evaluated red 40 in over a decade. Over a decade ago,
We have not.
We have not. At FDA, we have not evaluated the safety of red 40 in over a decade. So over a decade, that was the conclusion that FDA made.
But we have evaluated. We are in the process of evaluating red 3, and you may want to comment on that.
Well,
right.
let me say this. Red 3.
Okay. Yeah, so this, again, remember, this was in, this took place in December, and red 3 just got banned in January. So December 2024 is when they had this hearing, and then January 2025 is when red 3 got banned. So let's see what he has to say about it.
Has been known to cause cancer in cosmetics. but we still allow it to be put in our food. I don't understand that. Go ahead.
So Red 3, we have a petition in front of us to revoke the authorization for it, and we are hopeful that within the next few weeks, we will be acting on that petition, and a decision should be forthcoming.
Tell us that process. How does that work? The timeline, if we know something's deadly for anybody that ingests it, how do we continue to just study that and not say, hey, enough's enough?
So Red 3 presents an interesting example for us. It is actually known to be cancer in laboratory animals, rats, but the scientific consensus is that the mechanism of carcinogenicity in rats is not applicable in humans. However, under the FFDCA, which is the law that we implement, and any chemical that is shown to be carcinogenic in animals or humans, or should I say humans or animals, cannot be authorized by FDA. It's called the Delaney Clause. And so even though we don't believe there is a risk to humans under the Delaney Clause of the FFDCA, red dye, because it is known to cause cancer in laboratory animals, should not be authorized. And so that is what has been challenged FDA for many years, is how to manage around the Delaney Clause, where you have a scenario where, although there may be cancer evidence in animals, there is also evidence that is not harmful to humans.
Okay, so this is where I'm gonna stop it because I do have some commentary on it. So I thought what he said was very interesting. I mean, I wish the senator was more informed about the timeline of like Red 3, or that he knew about like the 2022 petition, because again, I've linked it below if you guys want to read it. It does give a good background on like the history and the timeline. This information that I'm sharing with you, the timeline specifically, mostly it's coming from that petition. But it's very interesting how this representative from the FDA didn't really share like what was that process, like why, since we know that that Red 3 causes cancer, why has that not been banned? He didn't really answer that. He went into saying that it sounds like one of the biggest issues that they have is knowing that Red 3 causes cancer in animals, but it doesn't cause cancer in humans. So it's kind of like, what do we do? Because it causes cancer in animals, but not in humans. So what? So it's allowed, but you mentioned the Delaney Clause, so you know that the law is if anything causes cancer in animals or in humans, we don't want it in our food. So why are we? What are we doing here? Like, what's going on? Why are you not just following the law and removing that ingredient? Because what benefit is there? What public health benefit is there? What benefit is there to you? What benefit is there to me to have this food dye in our foods? Like, we reviewed it. There really is no benefit for us if there is a harm, which again, I spoke a little bit about the possible like behavioral issues in kids that it may cause for some kids, and also the fact again that it causes cancer in animals, and that's the line that we don't want to cross. But the way that this gentleman sets it up and what he says kind of makes you believe that they're having like a struggle between the fact that it doesn't cause cancer in humans. Well, what are we waiting for? Are you waiting for a study to come out that it shows that it causes cancer in humans and then we ban it? And that's one of the issues that I have. I'm getting kind of like worked up, but that's one of the issues that I have with these things, is that they then find out that something is bad for us, and then it's like, oops, I'm sorry, causes cancer in humans. It doesn't, right? There's no studies that prove that, but let's just say that it did. What do? They turn around and just offer an apology? What about the people who were affected, right? That's my problem with it. And again, I wish the senator was a little bit more informed so they can ask better questions. Okay, I'm gonna continue with the video and take a chill pill.
I hope the FDA feels a responsibility to humans. Dr. Califf, you've probably heard quite a bit about this for the last 4 years that you've been serving us. Has this been a priority? Because we hear it, constantly about the dyes. I mean, dyes are just coloring. It has nothing to do with the taste or anything like that.
Yeah, a couple of things. So first of all, it is a priority, and I want to point out, listen carefully to what Mr. Jones said. We don't have data in humans that number 3 causes cancer, but we have it in laboratory animals. And so this gets complicated. And I want to remind you of what it takes to demonstrate that a substance that people eat causes cancer. You have to study a large number of people over a long period of time, because if something caused cancer right away, it would be obvious. But in these cases, you need something different. And I want to point out, we have a very small staff that can do this based on the budget. We have repeatedly asked for better funding for chemical safety. I brought Mr. Jones in to head the Human Foods Program because of his history of working on environmental issues. I think it is a huge priority. He's an expert in this. Please look at our requests for funding for the people who do this work. Remember that when we do ban something, it will go to court. And if we don't have the scientific evidence, it will stand up in court. We will lose in court.
Okay, I want to ask you this, and I think everybody in here wants to hear the answer to this question. We all hear Europe uses different dyes because they've come up with their evaluation that it does cause problems for humans. Do we have a different review system than they do about food dyes or anything put in food?
The biggest distinction between the U.S. and Europe is that they have been doing post-market review of chemicals now for over 20 years. In the FDA, although we have authorization to do post-market reviews, there's no statutory mandate to do them. One of the things that Dr. Califf mentioned is that as part of this reorganization, we are dedicating an entire office whose job is to do post-market chemical reviews. But we are several decades behind Europeans and our Canadian counterparts, because they have legal mandates to reevaluate chemicals that have been authorized at some point in the past. We don't, but we are going to undertake it. We are going to definitely struggle with the resources necessary to do that.
Yeah, I think this is also where it gets a little bit tricky. So I should have stopped the video, but I didn't. When the gentleman was saying sometimes when they ban something, they get taken to court by industries that maybe want to use, for example, on this specific example, that want to use the food dye, right? So I know I'm kind of being hard on the FDA, but I know that there is other things at play I'm not too knowledgeable about now, but as something that I do want to learn about, the intricacies, like how things actually work and the different influence, and that the sometimes sad thing is that it feels like what should be at the forefront, which is the health of humans, the health of us, people, that's not the priority, right? It seems to be like financial, which fine, right? Okay, if that is the game, then what you can do, what I can do, is just become more informed. Because going back to the statistic that I gave about the fruit cocktails, the fact that the sales went down 40% when they didn't use the red dye, and that's because maybe people just didn't like the product anymore, right? So there was another statistic that there was about a $246 million loss when they didn't use this red dye. So obviously that was like negative for them, but that kind of also highlights the power of the consumer. We vote with our dollars, and I know, I don't know if that's cliche or like a lot of people say that. It doesn't matter. Like we do vote with our dollars, but sometimes when you don't even know that you should be voting with your dollars or like what to look out for, that's where, it gets tricky. So I think there's like about a minute and a half more left. So let me play that.
There's a real lesson here from, I don't know if you eat Fruit Loops.
Okay, and I forgot. So he also talked about post-consumer testing. So yes, it seems like in the United States, like right now, when an ingredient is in the market, the FDA doesn't like test it, doesn't go back and see like how it's doing. I guess they do that in Europe. It seems like now there's going to be a new department that does that. But then again, they're already saying like, yeah, we're establishing this new department, but we don't have a ton of money for it. So then how good is this department going to be? We don't know. So let's see. That's something that I'm going to want to cover and like share with you guys what I find. Okay, so let me continue to play this.
I grew up every once in a while eating Fruit Loops. But there's a real lesson here, and I haven't verified this myself, but it's widely written that when the dyes that make Fruit Loops bright were taken out for the reasons that you give, the sales went straight down and they were put back in. So as long as we have a consumer-driven system where what people like in the short term is what drives the system, unless we have help from you all, that is clear direction from Congress, particularly given the recent Supreme Court decisions, it's going to be really hard for us to mandate things come off. Just a point I'm going to make over and over, and I apologize.
Okay, so I'll stop playing it there. Yeah, so that was interesting. He brought up Fruit Loops, which Fruit Loops were in the news, right, recently. If you guys didn't see, there was like a showcasing of like Fruit Loops from Europe and Fruit Loops sold in the US, and like the different food dyes that are being used. Like we use artificial food dyes here, but the same company selling Fruit Loops in Europe is using more natural or derived from more like natural sources. So that's what so that's something that's happened. But he mentioned the sales of Fruit Loops goes down. Okay, so what? Who does that? It's just interesting because like who does that hurt? It hurts the company selling the Fruit Loops. Does it hurt the consumer? Did the consumer lose money off of it? No, they actually, it's Fruit Loops, that's a ultra processed like cereal. I understand people eat it, no judgment. It's not the best breakfast for our kiddos, but everybody, you do what is best for you and your family. But that's, you're supposed to be working for the public, right? You're not supposed to be, your interest is not the fact that this company is like losing money. So maybe his point was that since the company loses money, it's of big interest to them that they have these food dyes. So maybe when the FDA goes to ban the food dyes, and then they get taken to court and maybe lose in court. I don't know. But yeah, very, very interesting. So I wanted to just share that with you. And that is pretty much the end of this video. I really hope that you guys enjoyed it. I hope that you learned something new, and I learned about the history and Red 3. Remember that even though it was banned, it's not actually going to be out of our food into 2027. So you might still see it. So definitely check your labels. And it's not going to be out of our medication until 2028. So even though it was banned, these things do take time. Again, my name is Vanessa. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.